deep in the vast darkness of space, where only the silent hum of distant stars existed, a strange anomaly rippled across the void near Jupiter. It was nothing more than a flicker at first, an unnatural disturbance in the fabric of reality, but the sensors of Terran Defense Command immediately registered it. At first, the signal seemed like nothing, just another cosmic whisper lost in the chaos of space. But then, as Earth's most advanced AI systems decrypted it, the message was human. More than that, it was a distress call, marked urgent and classified at the highest level. Yet what truly defied logic was the ship's identification code attached to it. TDS Revenant. A warship designation that did not exist. A name that had never been assigned. A vessel that, by all records, had never been built. The Terran High Command was immediately thrown into chaos. Every database was scoured, every classified project rechecked, but no record of a ship named Revenant existed in any known timeline. And yet, the data embedded in the message suggested something even more impossible. The distress call originated from over 200 years in the future. It wasn't a simple error, nor a glitch in the system. The ship had sent this message, intentionally reaching backward through time, warning of an unnamed catastrophe. The distress signal wasn't just a cry for help. It was a desperate plea to prevent something terrible. But before the scientists and military strategists could even begin to process what this meant, reality itself trembled. Near Jupiter's orbit, a massive rift tore open in space, an unnatural wound carved through the void, glowing with an eerie, shifting light. Alarms blared across every Terran station, as the fabric of reality twisted like liquid, bending under an unseen force. And then, from the swirling chaos of the anomaly, a shape began to emerge. A warship. Enormous, blackened, scarred by battle, its hull covered in damage that spoke of a war beyond anything humanity had ever faced. The vessel, though battered and broken, was unmistakably human. It carried the markings of the Terran Defense Fleet, except the symbols were old, worn down, their design subtly different from modern insignias, as if they had evolved over centuries of war. For a long, breathless moment, no one spoke. No one moved. Earth's entire defense network, its entire fleet, watched in stunned silence as the Revenant, a ship that shouldn't exist, drifted forward, breaking free from the collapsing rift. It was real. Not a ghost, not a malfunction, but an actual warship, stranded in a past that was never meant to see it. Aboard the bridge of the Terran flagship Vanguard, Admiral Elias Grayson stared at the impossible sight, his mind struggling to grasp the implications. If this ship was from the future, then that meant something had gone terribly wrong. Something so catastrophic that it had forced humanity to send a warship back in time, despite the paradoxes, despite the risks. But why? As docking drones cautiously approached the derelict vessel, the first scan sent waves of unease through the command crew. The Revenant's power core was failing, its life support systems barely operational, and yet there were faint, erratic life signs buried deep within the wreckage. Survivors. But how? And more importantly, what had they been fleeing from? Grayson didn't need anyone to spell it out for him. Whatever had happened in the future, whatever had forced this ship to be hurled backward in time, it was bad. Worse than anything humanity had faced before. And whatever nightmare the Revenant had escaped from there was no guarantee it hadn't followed. As the Terran fleet scrambled to establish communications, something even more unsettling became clear. The ship's automated systems were still online, but heavily encrypted. Security protocols refused access to most of its internal records. Even now, 2 centuries before its intended time, the Revenant refused to share its secrets with its own past. But a single decrypted file did emerge from the scrambled data. A warning, written in bold, urgent text. They know. They are coming. The words sent a chill through every soul who read them. Who were they? What had humanity done to earn such a dire warning from its own future? The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken fears. Then, for the first time, the Revenant stirred. Its failing engines flickered, struggling to reignite, as if the ship itself was waking up. And from the darkness of the ship's main control deck, A single voice, weak but determined, cut through the static of the comms channel. "This is Captain Dorian Hale of the Terran warship Revenant." A long pause followed, as if the man had barely any strength left to speak. Then, with a final breath, he uttered the words that would change the course of history forever. If you're hearing this, it's already too late. The Revenant loomed in the silence of space, its massive, battle-worn hull a ghostly reminder of a future humanity had yet to live through. The docking teams moved cautiously, their small crafts like insects against the colossal warship, scanning every inch of its surface. Scars of battle, deep gashes torn through its reinforced plating, told stories of wars no history book had recorded. What enemy had caused this? And how had the ship survived long enough to fall into the past? Inside the command center of the Terran flagship Vanguard, Admiral Elias Grayson watched the live feed with growing unease. The Revenant should not exist. And yet, here it was, a relic of a future war thrown into a time that wasn't ready for it. Whatever answers it held, they were locked away within its damaged systems, and its few surviving crew members, who were still too weak to explain the horrors they had escaped. As Terran engineers breached the ship's outer airlocks, the first eerie realization settled in this warship was not just advanced, it was something beyond their current level of technology. The armor plating, though scarred, was composed of an alloy no scientist could identify. The weapon systems, even in their dormant state, emitted energy readings that shouldn't be possible. And the internal layout of the ship was wrong. Corridors stretched longer than the ship's outer dimensions should allow. Strange interfaces flickered with symbols that weren't part of any known human programming. And deeper inside, there were sections entirely sealed off, blocked by an unknown force. It was as if the Revenant wasn't just from the future, but from a reality shaped by war, desperation, and knowledge far beyond what the present era could comprehend. Then, without warning, the ship's emergency systems reactivated. Lights flickered on, power surged through the dead corridors, and an automated defense grid scanned the intruders. For a moment, the fleet held its breath. But instead of an attack, the ship's AI spoke, its voice echoing through the empty halls, a deep, mechanical tone laced with something unsettlingly human. Temporal breach detected. Adjusting security protocols. Warning: unauthorized access to future classified technology is prohibited. All non-cleared personnel must vacate. The message repeated 3 times before the system stabilized. It was clear the ship recognized that it was in the past, and it wasn't willing to let the people of this era tamper with what they weren't meant to understand. Admiral Grayson's mind raced. This was a disaster waiting to happen. Humanity had never encountered time travel before, and now they had a warship filled with weapons far beyond their capabilities, locked down by its own systems. What were they supposed to do? They couldn't just leave it drifting in space, and they couldn't risk activating something they couldn't control. But as these questions filled the minds of the fleet's best strategists, something far worse happened. The sensors on the Vanguard screamed with sudden warnings. Multiple unidentified ships had entered the system. At first, they thought it was just another patrol fleet from one of the known galactic powers. But as the alien ships approached, it became terrifyingly clear. These vessels were unlike anything humanity had encountered before, and they were heading straight for the Revenant. Aboard the flagship, tactical officers scrambled to analyze the data. The ships were built for war, sleek, predatory designs, moving with terrifying coordination. Their weapon systems were already primed, their targeting locked onto the ancient warship as if they had been hunting it across time itself. Then, without hesitation, they opened fire. The first plasma volleys streaked toward the Revenant, but before the human fleet could even react, the ancient warship woke. Its automated defenses roared to life, and for the first time, humanity witnessed what a warship from the future was truly capable of. Energy shields flared, absorbing the enemy assault effortlessly. Then, with a precision that no present-era AI could replicate, the Revenant returned fire. There was no warning, no build-up, just devastation. A single pulse from the warship's primary cannon cut through space like a blade of pure destruction, erasing one of the alien ships instantly. Another barrage followed, striking 2 more enemy vessels, reducing them to burning debris before they could even attempt to retreat. The sheer power was horrifying. This was not just an advanced warship. It was a weapon built to end wars before they even began. For a brief moment, silence filled the battlefield. The remaining alien vessels hesitated, recalculating their chances of survival. But the Revenant wasn't done. It had recognized these attackers. Even as its hull burned, even as its systems struggled to remain operational in this uncharted past, it had one mission to eliminate the enemy at all costs. The final shots came with terrifying efficiency. What should have been a difficult battle was over in mere seconds. The Revenant had wiped out an entire enemy fleet with ease, using weapons that shouldn't even exist in this timeline. And that was when the final realization hit Admiral Grayson like a hammer. This ship wasn't just from the future. It was from a future where humanity had been fighting something far worse than anything they knew today. And now, because of its arrival, that war had begun centuries too soon. As the wreckage of the destroyed fleet drifted into the void, Grayson turned to his officers, his voice grim. "Send a message to High Command. The Revenant is not just a ship, it's a warning. And whatever it was built to fight, it's coming." The silence after the battle was deafening. The wreckage of the alien warships drifted through space, their twisted remains a grim reminder of what had just happened. The Revenant, though heavily damaged, stood victorious, its weapons now silent, its shields flickering as they struggled to stay active. The Terran fleet, which had watched the battle unfold in stunned disbelief, remained frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the most battle-hardened officers aboard the Vanguard knew they had just witnessed something beyond comprehension. This was not just a powerful warship from the future. This was a weapon designed to fight something beyond anything humanity had ever faced. And now, because of its sudden arrival in this timeline, the future had been changed forever. Admiral Elias Grayson clenched his fists as he stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, his mind racing. The battle had been over in seconds. The Revenant had unleashed firepower that modern humanity could not even begin to understand, let alone replicate. It was terrifying. This ship had not been built for battle, it had been built for survival. And whatever enemy it had been fighting in the future was powerful enough to justify such devastating weaponry. But who were they? The alien fleet that had just attacked was unknown to current records. They had come straight for the Revenant, ignoring everything else in the system, as if they had been chasing it across time itself. And the warship's AI had not hesitated. It had recognized them. It had executed them without warning. What did that mean? Had humanity already been fighting these creatures in the future? Or worse, had humanity lost? As Grayson turned his gaze back to the warship, a deep unease settled over him. The Revenant was still locked down, its systems refusing to share classified data with its own past. Even now, 200 years before its intended time, it was still bound by security protocol. But one thing was clear, this ship had not come back in time by accident. It had been sent. And if that was true, then the implications were horrifying. Someone, somewhere in the future, had been desperate enough to violate the laws of time, to risk altering history itself, all to send this ship back. That could only mean one thing. The war had not just been catastrophic. It had been unwinnable. A crackling noise interrupted his thoughts. The Revenant's communication systems, long silent, suddenly flickered to life. A weak, strained voice came through, barely above a whisper, filled with exhaustion and pain. "This is Captain Dorian Hale. Terran warship Revenant. Do you read me?" The bridge crew froze. One of the Revenant's crew had survived. Grayson stepped forward, his voice steady but urgent. "We read you, Captain Hale. You're safe now. You're 200 years in the past. We need to know what happened. What sent you back?" There was a long pause. Then, a deep, broken sigh. "The war," Hale said, his voice filled with something that sent a chill through every soul listening. "The war we never saw coming. The war we were never meant to win." The transmission grew distorted as static filled the channel. Hale struggled to speak, his words interrupted by gasps of pain. "The Drell. They found us. We weren't ready. They tore through our fleets, our worlds. Our best weapons barely slowed them down. We fought for centuries. We lost everything. The war was never about survival. It was about delay, buying time. But in the end, it wasn't enough. So we did the unthinkable. We built the Revenant and we sent it back. We didn't know if it would work. But if you're hearing this, then that means we changed something. That means you still have a chance. The bridge was deathly silent. No one dared to breathe. The Drawl. That name had never been recorded in any of humanity's known archives. These creatures had never made contact with Earth. But in the future, they would bring humanity to the brink of extinction. And now, because of the Revenant, they knew about humanity centuries earlier than they should have. The war that was supposed to happen in the distant future had now been dragged into the present. Grayson exhaled slowly, his mind piecing together the terrifying reality. The Revenant had not just been built as a last-ditch weapon. It had been designed as a message, a warning from the last remnants of a dying future, sent back through time in the hopes of rewriting history. But the warship had arrived too soon. Instead of preparing for the Drawl over centuries, humanity had mere years, maybe even months before the first invasion fleets arrived. The timeline had been shattered. The future was no longer written. As Captain Hale's voice grew weaker. He spoke one final time. Listen to me. You can't run. You can't negotiate. The Drawl don't want peace. They don't conquer, they erase. You have one advantage now. You know they're coming. Use the Revenant. Learn from it. And whatever you do, don't make the same mistakes we did. Then the transmission cut out. No one spoke. No one moved. The weight of those final words settled over them like a storm. Grayson turned toward his officers, his voice calm but firm. Send word to High Command. Humanity has just been given a second chance, and we're not going to waste it. The battle was over. But the war that should have never begun had just started. The fleet moved like a silent storm through the void, their dark hulls absorbing the distant light of dying stars. Earth's first warships, built in secrecy, carried a deadly purpose. Humanity had watched the galaxy for decades, listening, studying, learning. They had seen how the great empires ruled, how the so-called dominant species of the cosmos grew complacent, arrogant in their power. None of them had ever considered that humanity, the newcomers, the overlooked species from a single insignificant world, would one day become a threat. And that mistake would cost them everything. Admiral Jonathan Hale stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, his eyes locked onto the holographic projection of their first target, Zar Kellis, a fortress world of the Vorn Dominion. The Vorn were old, their empire vast, but their strength had turned to rust. Their fleets had not fought a real war in centuries. Their defenses relied on automated systems, ancient protocols that had not been updated in generations. To them, humanity was a minor species, barely worthy of notice. And that was why this strike would succeed. It was not just an attack. It was a statement. The galaxy had lived in peace for too long, thinking war was a thing of the past. Humanity had come to remind them that peace was an illusion. The countdown reached 0. Across the fleet, thousands of human warships powered up their weapons, their systems running cold and silent until this very moment. Then, in a single, devastating instant, the void was torn apart by light. Kinetic rounds, plasma lances, and railgun slugs screamed through the darkness, ripping into Zar Kellis's orbital defenses before the Vorn even realized they were under attack. Their stations erupted in fire, shattered by weapons they had never seen before. The Indomitable led the charge. The first wave of human fighters swarmed into the chaos, slipping past the crumbling defenses and striking deep into the heart of the Vorn command structure. Admiral Hale watched as enemy communications collapsed, their coordination shattered in moments. The Vorn had always relied on centralized control, believing no enemy would ever be bold enough or foolish enough to strike them directly. They had grown too used to ruling without challenge. And now, their arrogance was being torn apart piece by piece. From the surface of Zarkelis, desperate distress signals filled the airwaves. Civilians, officials, military leaders, all calling for reinforcements that would never come in time. Hale listened to them in silence. He had no hatred for the Vorn people. This was not about revenge or conquest. This was survival. Humanity had watched the galaxy long enough to understand a simple truth: peace was a lie told by the strong to keep the weak obedient. If Earth had waited, if they had continued to grow in silence, eventually one of these empires would have decided to wipe them out. The only way to secure humanity's future was to strike first. Deep within the command center of the planet, High Chancellor Vorix stared at the battlefield with disbelief. Humanity? It was impossible. The Terrans were supposed to be nothing more than an emerging species, still struggling to find their place in the galactic order. And yet, here they were, bringing war to one of the oldest powers in the universe. His advisors screamed for orders, but Vorix already knew it was over. The human fleet had cut off every escape route, blocked every communications relay. They had planned this to perfection. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Hale received the final confirmation Zarkelis' orbital defenses had fallen. The planet was theirs for the taking. He took a slow breath, then gave the order. Ground forces launched from the carriers, descending like fire raining from the heavens. Drop pods slammed into the surface, unleashing shock troopers who moved with terrifying precision, cutting through resistance before it could form. The Vorn soldiers fought bravely, but they had never faced an enemy like this. Humanity had spent decades preparing for this moment. Every strike, every attack was calculated. Efficient, unstoppable. It did not take long. Within hours, the Vorn surrendered. Their banners, once symbols of an empire that had lasted for millennia, now lay in the dust. The fortress world of Zarkelis, once thought untouchable, had fallen in a single day. Humanity had announced its arrival to the galaxy, not with words, but with fire and blood. As the battle came to an end, Hale stood in silence, watching the burning world below. This was only the beginning. The galaxy would react with horror, with fury. But it did not matter. The first strike had been made. The great empires, once so secure in their power, now knew the truth. Humanity had risen, and they would not stop. The first shot was fired in silence. A single pulse of light, a weapon traveling faster than thought, burning through the darkness of space. It tore through the hull of the Resolute, Earth's diplomatic vessel, reducing it to fragments in an instant. No warning. No demand. No declaration. Just death. On board the Vanguard, Admiral Elias Grayson watched in horror as the screens filled with wreckage, the final transmission of the Resolute cutting off mid-sentence. The delegates on board had been some of humanity's finest minds: diplomats, scientists, peacemakers. And now they were gone, their bodies drifting into the void, victims of an enemy they had never even considered a threat. The bridge was silent, the crew frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Grayson clenched his fists, his mind racing. This was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. The K-Thari, a species that had long watched humanity from the shadows of the galactic community, had made their intentions clear. They had chosen war, and they had made the worst mistake imaginable. They had struck first. The High Command back on Earth received the news with disbelief. The Resolute had been sent to negotiate, to open peaceful relations with the K-Thari, who had remained silent observers of galactic politics for centuries. There had never been hostilities between the two species. Humanity had assumed they were simply indifferent, uninterested in expansion or conflict. But now, as warships mobilized across the stars, the truth became horrifyingly clear. The K-Thari had never ignored humanity. They had been waiting, watching. And when the moment was right, they had struck. Grayson knew what would come next. The Council debated retaliation, struggling with the weight of the decision. But the choice had already been made for them. The K-Thari had not just destroyed a ship. They had declared that humanity had no place among the stars. And if humanity did not fight, if they did not strike back, then they would be erased from existence. The order was given. The fleets moved. Across human space, warships powered up, their engines burning with fury. Earth had spent decades preparing for defense, believing that if war ever came, they would need to protect their worlds. But this was different. This was not defense. This was vengeance. The Vanguard led the charge, its escort ships forming a wall of steel and fire as they entered K-Thari space. The enemy was waiting. They had believed they were ready, but they had underestimated the fury of a species that had been pushed too far. The first battle was over in minutes. Humanity struck with overwhelming force, their weapons ripping through K-Thari defenses like paper. The enemy fleet, though powerful, was unprepared for the sheer brutality of human warfare. They had expected hesitation, negotiation, restraint. They received none. The Vanguard's cannons turned entire ships into debris, while fighter squadrons danced through the battlefield, targeting command ships with deadly precision. The K-Thari fell back, their lines breaking, their arrogance crumbling. But the war did not end there. The K-Thari refused to surrender. They sent wave after wave of reinforcements, their desperation growing with each defeat. It became clear that this was no longer about strategy or survival. It was about something deeper, something older. The K-Thari had feared humanity for centuries, feared what they would become. And now, that fear was consuming them. Planet after planet fell. Human warships pushed deeper into enemy space, each battle more vicious than the last. There were no negotiations, no ceasefires. The war had become a storm that neither side could stop. And as the body count rose, as entire worlds burned, one question haunted Admiral Grayson. Why? Why had the K-Thari started this war? Why had they refused peace? What had they seen in humanity that terrified them so much? The answer came too late. In the ruins of a K-Thari command station, hidden deep beneath the surface of a shattered world, human soldiers uncovered records older than any known civilization. The K-Thari had not attacked out of greed or conquest. They had not struck first out of arrogance. They had done it out of fear. Fear of what humanity was destined to become. They had seen it before. Another species, long ago, had risen from the shadows, much like humanity. They had started small, weak, underestimated. But as they grew, as they expanded, they became something unstoppable. Something that reshaped the galaxy in fire and destruction. The K-Thari had witnessed the last remnants of that long-forgotten empire. And when they saw humanity, they saw history repeating itself. Grayson stood in the ruins of the command station, staring at the ancient warnings, the desperate messages left behind by those who had come before. He realized the terrible truth. The war had never been about humanity's actions. It had been about what humanity could become. The K-Thari had tried to stop it before it was too late. And in doing so, they had ensured their own destruction. The final battle came swiftly. The last K-Thari stronghold fell, their homeworld left defenseless. The war, which should never have begun, was over. Humanity stood victorious. But as Grayson looked upon the ruins, as he watched the flames rise into the dark sky, he felt no triumph. Only a chilling thought remained in his mind. The K-Thari had tried to prevent the future they feared, and in doing so, they had ensured that it would come to pass. The war had changed humanity. It had hardened them, sharpened them, made them into something else, something the galaxy would never forget. And as the fleet turned towards new horizons, towards new enemies, Grayson realized the terrible irony. The war that should never have begun was only the beginning.